So I think over the history of the AFL and the trade period, journalists have been very, very onto it. It is, I think, very rare that a trade happens in the AFL where a journalist hasn't mentioned it or, hasn't been talking about it. Something like that, right? It's very different to most sports where, especially like in the NBA, trades can just randomly happen like that without anyone even knowing about it, and it completely just shocks you. Like, I remember earlier on in the year when the Los Angeles Lakers randomly traded Anthony Davis for Luka Doncic from the Dallas Mavericks, and everyone and their dad was shocked. Like, not one single NBA reporter or journalist even knew anything about it. But with the AFL, it's always been different. AFL journalists seem to know pretty much everything that happens with the trade period, and as trades go on through most trade periods, there are always trades that we knew were happening, like they were in development or they were in talks, right? But as the years have gone on, there have been some trades that have slipped through the cracks where we hadn't heard journalists, previously speak about them. And a lot of them were pick swaps, very minor things that journalists just had no idea were really happening because it just overall didn't matter. But, and there's a big but here, and I'm talking about big but, almost as big as freaking Kim Kardashian's butt, right? There is a big but here, because in 2025, we just had a trade period which not only had like one, or not only had like two, but had multiple trades go through that no journalists saw coming. No journalists even spoke about or even talked about, and a couple of these examples. First of all, Richmond trading for a guy by the name of Patrick Rechko, sending the Geelong Football Club a 6th round pick of pick 99. Now, I think everyone can agree that when we heard Richmond acquired Patrick Rechko, all of our reactions were this.
Who the fuck is that guy? Who the fuck is that?
Who?
I don't even know who you are.
10th pick, Zaire Williams. Once again, and with all due respect. Oh!
But nevertheless, it was still a trade, and a player got traded to one of, if not the biggest teams in the AFL, and not a single soul even knew it was happening. No one talked about it, no one mentioned it, and no one cared about it until it actually happened. And of course, some of you guys might be thinking and saying, the reason no journalists talked about it is because it was such a random player that no one really knew and no one really cared about. So journalists just didn't think to really cover it. But that is completely bullshit. That is a completely bullshit reason, because we have seen so many random players get traded over the years in AFL history where journalists have still spoken about them a fair bit. Like, there have been so many moments where very small level random players have requested trades or have had reports about them being done. Like, I remember when Tyson Stengel was still a rookie at Richmond, and not many people knew about his name outside of Richmond supporters. And you know what? That's actually probably a lie. Richmond was so goddamn popular, you'd probably know their least likely player on there. But Tyson Stengel at one stage probably was their least popular player on that Richmond team. And when he got traded to Adelaide, we knew that shit was happening for weeks, right? There's probably better examples I can use than Tyson Stengel before Geelong Tyson Stengel. But not a single soul talked about Patrick Rechko going to the Richmond Football Club. And this wasn't the only one. Finbar Maley, kind of a cult hero this year for North Melbourne, he randomly got traded to Adelaide, and there were no reports about him getting traded. Not one journalist really mentioned anything, and if it was mentioned, it was very minor. There was no one saying any trade was actually going to happen, and little did we know, the North Melbourne Football Club would go on to trade Finbar Maley, I think is how you say it, to the Adelaide Football Club, and 99.999% of the people had no idea about it. I didn't have any idea about it. I had more important things to do while this shit happened, like, watching Mia Khalifa. But it was just because it wasn't reported, just like the Patrick Rechko one. No one talked about it. No one reported on it. Nothing even happened with it. And this continues. Jack Steele being traded to the Melbourne Demons wasn't reported until like the night before. Wasn't reported. And the night before, when it was reported, it was a very minor report that didn't seem like it was that confident that it was ever going to get done. And then the captain all of a sudden gets traded to the Melbourne Football Club. Like, don't get me wrong, we had heard that Jack Steele, St Kilda were shopping him around and that West Coast maybe had a little bit of interest in him, but not a single peep was said about the Melbourne Football Club until like probably 12 hours before it even happened, which was amazing. And still, even when it happened, most journalists weren't talking about it. There was like one or two journalists that actually covered Melbourne being interested in Jack Steele. It wasn't the usual, 800 million journalists like Tom Morris, Cal Toomey, Sam Edmund, etc. all talking about it. No, there was like one little report the night before, and that's all we heard about Jack Steele going to Melbourne until it actually happened. Even Giath to Melbourne. Giath to Melbourne was extremely late news. Like, we this is another one where we did hear it, but there was like one report on it, and it was very, very late. And then all of a sudden, he was traded to Melbourne. Like, the whole talk was Carlton being interested in him for weeks, and a couple other teams. Then all of a sudden, he's traded to Melbourne like a day after that report even happened. But ultimately, I feel like there is just so much going on now with trade periods and AFL teams also being more adventurous to the point where it's harder for these journalists to keep up. Like, for a couple years ago, for a trade to happen between two teams, it probably had to be spoken about for a couple weeks. But from what we are hearing, Jack Steele to Melbourne literally wasn't spoken about until like the last couple days of the trade period. And then reporters caught onto it literally like half a day before it happened, and then it happened. Like, if you were to tell me that was happening a couple of years ago, obviously I wouldn't believe you because it didn't freaking happen. Same with Giath. Giath to Melbourne probably only started negotiations like a couple of days before the trade period ended. Reporters only found out literally a little bit before the trade period ended as well, and then he was traded there. Patrick Rechko, no one even knew that was happening. No one knew Patrick Rechko was going to Richmond. And the funny thing about it was, from like a Blair Hartley interview, obviously the Richmond, list boss, he actually confirmed that they had started negotiations with Geelong a couple of weeks before the trade period even started. And there was ultimately very minor talk about Patrick Rechko actually going to Richmond, and like they just kind of agreed on it a couple of weeks before the trade period started. Then they revisited on the last day when I think Geelong had kind of realised they'd struck out on Curnow, obviously struck out on Marshall, and then they just made it happen, and Richmond sent and flipped them a rookie pick. That's literally all that happened with Patrick Rechko, and not a single journalist even knew about it. Same thing with Finbar Marley, or Finbar Maley, whatever the fuck it is. No journalists knew this was happening, and I still don't even know the story about this one. Like, I know the story about Rechko. The Richmond spoke to Geelong about it a couple of weeks before it happened, then confirmed it on the last day, and no reporters knew about that one. There's literally nothing on the Finbar, Maley one and how that unfolded, all of the above. But it happened without journalists knowing about it, and it really flew under the radar. And we've gotten to a point now where I think teams like Richmond very much specifically, have proven that AFL journalists don't know everything about the trade period. Because that Patrick Rechko one, how that just flew under the radar, not literally a single soul talked about it, is something that just wouldn't have happened a couple years ago. Flat out just wouldn't have happened. And this just became so common this year, and it's going to become more and more common next year as we go through the trade period and more trades happen and more surprise trades happen, more shock trades, late trades, all of the above, late negotiations. This is becoming a common thing now, and I think Richmond have genuinely proved that AFL journalists don't completely know everything about the trade period. But of course, I'd very much like to know all your thoughts and opinions on this in the comment section down below. What do you guys think about Richmond trading for Patrick Rechko? You know, Adelaide trading for Maley without anyone even freaking knowing about all these trades. All the above. Do the journalists know everything about the trade period these days? Or are they a little bit more in the dark now? Again, let me know your thoughts and opinions down below. Subscribe to my gaming/movie channel down below as well. Subscribe to this channel for all latest sports content and news. Go give me a follow on Instagram as well, which will be linked down below. But yeah, as I was saying, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and comment. And I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.